everyone, get ready for a relaxing coffee making session, and then later I will share my prep work towards a large painting. So the inspiration I gather and how I do the whole setup. Now, it's not a regular thing. I haven't done this type of a painting in a very long time, so it almost felt like I'm doing it for the first time. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. The actual painting will happen in a separate video. This is just a setup and prep. So of course a little coffee break is a good start when it comes to art or inspiration. I find that taking a little bit of time and making my favorite cup of coffee and just sitting down and take maybe 5-10 minutes of calm thinking and calm planning just in my mind without anything else is a good start. So when it comes to coffee, I like my coffee very light. I don't like a strong coffee flavor at all, and even less so the terrible breath as a aftermath. So yeah, coffee for me means literally tiny little bit of coffee flavor, which I enjoy, and mostly, as you can see, there is just frothed up milk, and that's how I like it. So for this latte, which is my kind of favorite at the minute, I have used a bit of caramel flavoring and instant coffee grains, but tiny little bit amount of it, brown sugar, and I'm showing you here my favorite cookies to go with a latte. These are just so good, and I am finishing them off. I have just the last one left, and they're so good. I just discovered them before Christmas, popping into Carluccio's to get a panettone. So these are very nice little cookies sprinkled with a bit of sugar. So yeah, and for milk, it has to be a plant-based milk because otherwise it will not froth up in that frother. And that's it. That's my coffee. So I believe this plant is called Chinese money tree, and that was the baby, and here is the mama tree. So they basically pop up the little babies from the bottom of the pot there, or the plant, and then you can just take them out, put them into a separate little pot, and they really flourish quite well. And I love the shape of the leaves, which will be an inspiration for the artwork. I had to wrestle with the easel for a little bit to get it going. Totally forgot how to use it, which leg went which way. But the occasional sip of coffee really helped to get through this and figure it out, so I got there in the end. Love having an easel propped up in the studio. It sort of lends you to this quick way of painting something on a larger scale and feel a bit more less confined than how you would feel in a sketchbook, for instance. And I find that standing up painting with long handles, brushes with long handles, is a totally different experience. Not something I would like to do every day, but once in a while to have that flexibility really helps to kind of widen your techniques and experience. So there, I got a bit of out of breath, and another sip of coffee was quite a little helper. But I was again wrestling this time with getting the paper out. I ordered this large sheet of paper, I think a couple of these sheet of papers. They're 300 GSM, and they're the, I think, Canson Heritage, if I'm not mistaken. I ordered them on Jackson's, and they really make a fantastic job of securing them to the cardboard, huge cardboard box, and so you do have to wrestle a little bit to get it out of there. But eventually it made it out of the packaging, and I will fix it in there and sort out my little table next to it. So that will be my working station, and I'm adding a few tools and art supplies. I always begin by picking art supplies by the texture. So for instance, is it acrylics? If it is it going to be heavy body, or is it going to be a fluid, more ink-like paint? Then I've got oil paints there in the stick form, which means they dry permanently, and that gives you another fantastic texture. In my studio I have carpet on the floor, which is the same carpet that runs through the second and third floors, and so I'm trying to protect it using an old like a Turkish towel, a type of a rag, and that will do nicely. Here I have a selection of different textural tools, like the catalysts from Princeton, and also brushes that have long handles. I actually haven't used them, but I did buy them for this exact purpose, for a larger painting. Holding a brush right at the end, if it has a long handle, is a very useful way of loosening up and creating something a bit more abstract, which is what I'm looking here for. Also going through some of my sketchbooks that may inspire me for a certain color palette or a certain texture or a certain pattern, and I can already see a few things that I'd like to incorporate. Here I have a kind of loose idea that I want it to be a bit botanical, but also quite abstract. So there will be certain patterns taken from the botanical, as I showed you the Chinese money tree before, but it won't be as obvious to say that those are botanical elements. Anyway, that's what I have in my mind so far. It all needs to come together, and it's not a straightforward process. For me, like I said, I start with textures of art supplies, and then I think about the color palette, and then eventually what is it that I want to create. So far I have picked a variety of acrylic paints, so I think acrylic gouache, and so the one from Holbein Acryla Gouache, and then the acrylic inks from FW, Rowney. And now I'm looking at Winsor Newton, and yeah, also kind of getting some gouache paints there. So the other source that I use for inspiration are books, and for this specific piece of art I decided to pick 3 books, and I will link them down below in the description for you. But these 3 books have a different purpose for me personally. So here I am looking at textures. The textures of the interior design here are fantastic. There is a lot of focus on plants and so many different colors, so many different textures. It's really, it's like a, you know, encyclopedia of textural elements. I love the certain editorial style of this book as well. There is a bit of artwork there as well, and all of that gives me a great source of inspiration. And there I spotted a leaf which is very similar to the money tree, and it's just popping up in a few places, so I am quite enjoying that shape. The second book that I picked is great for color inspiration. There's a lot of popping of the color, and I noticed that the creator has really put so much attention into color palettes. Pretty much every floral arrangement that you can see in this book has a very accurate depiction of color. So you can see that the turquoise keeps coming up in a lot of pages, in a lot of the photographs, and then you can also find different ways of adding other colors to make the turquoise pop and stand out even more, which is fantastic for when you're creating art. You want to find ways, like here for instance there is a multitude of green colors, and in specific the mustardy greens and the green ochres and the gold greens. So you can find all sorts of color palettes in this book, and obviously the bonuses, the beautiful flowers that are included in the interior design. And again, there's a lot of focus on flowers and plants, but including them in the home decor, which will make them stand out even more. Third and final book I picked to help with inspiration for patterns. I think this is a book that goes through different plants and tells you a little bit about them and perhaps the characteristics, so that you could look after these plants without killing them too quickly. And so yeah, it's quite pretty, but I also like the actual artwork. It seems to be done in watercolor and in a very contemporary way, but I get inspired by the patterns of all these beautiful succulents and different plants, and I know that I want to create some sort of shapes, round spherical shapes in my artwork. I obviously quite like the Chinese money tree shape of the leaf, but then also I can create a variation of these spherical shapes, some of them looking more like pebbles, closely together, rounder, elongated, etc. So there's a wide range of these shapes that I can push them in different directions and play along with the textural and the pattern effect. Now I'm going back to the second book and just refreshing my memory of the color palettes here, and I wanted to have a closer look just to start picking out different colors. Now there's also a specific color palette that I already had in mind, which I showed in that little sketchbook earlier. It had the blue and the burnt siennas and a little bit of pastel pinks in there. I think this is where it's going to go, but it may also go into dark greens with a bit of still burnt sienna and light pinks instead of the blue. So I haven't fully decided, and that will be literally last minute decision just based on how I will be feeling in that particular moment. But for now, I will just pick colors that I think I want to use in the painting. I'm starting with the Shiva oil paint sticks and picking just a few colors to begin with, and just putting them to one side. Also looking at the Sennelier oil sticks, which are quite different. So the Shivas, they are very matte when they dry and mostly very opaque. With the Sennelier oil sticks you can get a nice variety where you can have like a more transparent color that you can build up slightly and then sort of fade into very kind of thin layer of paint, or you can get very opaque paints as well. And again, just picking a nice variety. Texture and different transparency levels is what I'm after for this piece, because in terms of the color palette I want it to be more or less quite minimal and let the textures speak for themselves. I don't want it to be too busy, I don't want too much going on. I want it to be sort of minimalistic and have some brush marks or textural effects that will stand out quite nicely and depict that contemporary mood with a bit of botanical essence in there. I'm starting with the FW Acrylic Inks by Rowney, and I love how they flow into one another. You can use them almost like watercolors if you use a lot of water, but also you can really build up to get that acrylic paint almost kind of gloss to it once they dry. Now I don't know how this is going to work because my paper is obviously propped up, so it's not laying flat, and I don't know whether I will be going for some droplets or drips of paint, or whether I will use a like a palette to mix up the paints or pick them up with a brush rather than dropping them straight onto the paper, because they will just roll down these droplets of paint. So yeah, that's something that I will be figuring out as I start, and I want there to be an element of spontaneous creative art making rather than really planning it out and kind of have it all thought through. I do enjoy sometimes these occasional mistakes that can turn out to be a very kind of fun element. Here I am moving on to the Holbein Acryla Gouache, which is a great hybrid between sort of like a watercolor, opaque watercolor, to a permanent acrylic paint. So again, depending how much water you use per paint ratio, you can create different effects. Now, I'm not planning to use just the classic watercolor in my painting, but I may use these gouaches and the acrylic paints, kind of diluting them with water to achieve watercolor effect. So I definitely will have that flexibility with the paints that I have picked here. And also I haven't actually swatched or picked any of the golden high flow acrylic paints, which I definitely plan on using in the painting. So those are fantastic. They're very similar to the acrylic inks and just super beautiful colors. Here I am actually going to try and play with textures, so packing on this heavy body acrylic, which lends quite nicely to textural effects. I am using this little spatula, and it's like a silicone tool, the catalyst from the catalyst range, and I'm achieving or trying to achieve actually this sort of texture here that I can see on the walls and the furniture, also the kind of rustic looking mirrors, that element of vintage but in a contemporary way, and that's what I'm trying to do by just kind of mixing the paints and trying to layer them on top of another and seeing how well they interact, as well as what texture I can achieve with that. Here I'm just using a roller, and this is also a fun way of kind of filling up a large area in a very quick way, but without having two perfect lines. So I think I may very well use that on the large paper canvas that I have already propped up on the easel. And this tool, I sometimes manage to use it in a way that I really love it, and then it kind of, I find it's easy to overwork with it. So the less marks I make with it, the more I love the effect. The more scribbly marks I try to achieve, the more overworked and messy it looks to me personally. So I'll have to kind of really just try and work with it a little bit more, just to get different levels of texture and marks in there. Here I'm just going for it and trying to layer and mix different mediums of paint. So there is acrylic paint, there is the oil paint, and all sorts of different things. Also using a little tissue to smudge things out and then build up the paint again, and really trying to find a combination that I might use in the main painting. I also really enjoyed blending two colors of the oil sticks. So these are the Shiva oil sticks, and they're quite matte and very, very opaque and kind of thick laying. I really enjoyed blending them with this catalyst tool because it's a little bit flexible. It doesn't take away the paint, but it just blends it on the spot, and I quite like that. And I think I will use this tool also across the other oil sticks as well. I hope you enjoyed this process right from the beginning, and I will see you soon. Thanks for watching.